Gwynne, and today I will discuss Giambattista Bodoni in the context of printing and typography. This will involve who he was, what he'd done throughout his lifetime, where this took place, and why he should be regarded as one of the greats, and how he achieved this with the influences around him. So who was Bodoni? Bodoni was a typographer and printer. In his lifetime, this meant he was all-encompassing within his skills. When I talk about Bodoni being a typographer, I mean he was a typeface designer. He was able to design his typefaces by size, kerning, and characteristics. Included with this was his ability to cut the punch, strike the matrix, cast the type, set the type, and print the type. Printing also involved paper-making skills, using and mixing ink and its application, and the knowledge of bookbinding and presses. Bodoni could essentially design and manufacture a book from start to finish. Born in Saluzzo, Italy 1740, he was brought up around printing, with his father and grandfather both being printers. Bodoni was pretty much destined to be involved in printing. Bodoni would have been educated from a young age, learning both French and Italian in education for 7 years. Religion would also undoubtedly have had a role in the Bodoni family. In Saluzzo, Bodoni showed exceptional skills in wood gravings. Taking religious figures and images for his subject, he impressed the Bishop of Saluzzo. Bodoni recognised that his hometown was no place for him to stay to progress in his career, so he moved on to Turin, finding ready buyers for his prints. Talented and ambitious, Bodoni did not loiter here. He recognised Rome was a great opportunity for him. Rome and his apprenticeship, 1758. At age 18, Bodoni moved to Rome. Originally, the search for printing work around Rome was a struggle, until he came across a character called Ruggieri, the superintendent of the Propaganda Fide. The Propaganda Fide was the press of the Vatican, printing for the Catholic Church. Bodoni astounded Cardinal Spinelli with his woodcuts, so much so that they did not believe that they were produced by someone at the age of 18. Bodoni was appointed as an assistant compositor and hired for an apprenticeship on the spot. The Propaganda Fide was core to Bodoni's success in his career. Here he learnt to cut and cast letters, often in the style of Garamond. Bodoni also received tuition in the University of Rome by the supervision of Cardinal Spinelli. He was recognised for his love of languages, and therefore he was sent. At the university, Bodoni learnt Hebrew, Greek, and other languages, which, as you will see later, was so important to his exotic typefaces. Rome was also a place for Bodoni to develop his tastes. Surrounded by Roman typefaces cut in stone and beautiful old architecture, Bodoni developed a very classical, elegant, and grand taste within his designs. Eventually, Spinelli's death in 1763 saw the leave of Bodoni a few years later as he was in grief. Venturing 1766. Bodoni was to go to England after Rome. This land was full of printing prospects, and home to John Baskerville, who he was to work under. Other known printers were the Casalons. Returning home beforehand to see his family for the first time in years, he fell ill with malaria. His journey, as well as almost his life, was cut short. Parma was where Bodoni spent the rest of his life. Here in Parma, Bodoni produced his greatest works and contributions to printing and typography, producing the 1788 edition in his Manuale Tipografico, and then 5 years after his death, 1818, with thanks to his widow and the others, the publishing of the second edition hailed as his great work. Bodoni arrived in Parma in 1768, as Don Ferdinando, the Duke of Parma, had commissioned him to become director of the royal press. Through a contact called Picualdi, the contacting of another man named Dutillot was able to appoint Bodoni as the director of the press, as the Prime Minister of Parma, Giambattista, found him and referred him to Don Ferdinando. At the start of his career in Parma, Bodoni's works were of older style to what he is now recognised for. He first started using imported types such as Forni's, and in his I Voti first publication, Bodoni's works were indistinguishable to Forni type, playing such a large role and influencing Bodoni as a typeface designer. Bodoni was to only produce works that were in the interest of the court or the Duke of Parma. Many of these works were not significant, and in fact, Bodoni's lifelong friend Nicholas di Azzara accuses him of in such letters that he was not producing of anything of his worth. Bodoni's prints were still appreciated as beautiful works, but it was not of any challenge to Bodoni. He was much too comfortable, and he wasn't producing anything too significant. Eventually, some works came out of this period. In 1782, Emperor Paul I of Russia visited Parma. Bodoni seized this opportunity to produce Essai di Caractères Russes, demonstrating his ability to produce exotic types, and in this one was the Russian typefaces. The work was of such quality that the Russians saw this and said it had exceeded the works of all the presses in Russia. During his time in Parma, he received many offers from other royals, such as the Duke of Milan, offering to give him the director of the royal press in Milan. Eventually, a shook Don Ferdinando gave Bodoni more freedom and allowed him to start his own press. This was significant in Bodoni's career. It meant he could now work on what he chose, and consequently came his work of the second edition, the Manuale Tipografico, as this allowed him to produce more typefaces. Between these years, Bodoni had eventually married in 1971, at the age of 50 years, to his wife Margherita dall'Aglio. The Manuale Tipografico, 1788 and 1818 edition. This was to be known as Bodoni's greatest work, the Manuale Tipografico. As the name suggests, it's a typographic manual. The book is a folio collection of almost 300 Roman and Italic typefaces, with samples of his exotic typefaces such as Russian and Greek and Arabic. It was with this publishing in 1788 that the establishment of the modern typeface is agreed upon scholars. I will talk about why this is significant later. The second edition of the book was the updated version of the rest of his types that he designed after 1788, thanks to his widow for finishing this book. The Manuale Tipografico shows how Bodoni's typefaces had the elegance of an expert. His designs and designing as a typeface was not even bound by languages for developing beautiful typefaces. Bodoni had a real sense of perfectly balancing a typeface, but also the balance of decoration and clarity to make an elegant and sophisticated page, which once he over-decorated with borders and ornaments. On screen you can see the folio pages of how it displays his different typefaces. Bodoni's main contribution to typography and its history is the modern typeface. It's a style of typeface which it was achieved by extreme typographic refinement. As a designer, he had to reduce the serifs to fine horizontal hairlines. He virtually eliminated the brackets. Bodoni's modern typeface also has extreme contrast between thick and thin lines, or strokes, with a vertical angle of stress, most evident in the letter O. Bodoni did also contribute 289 beautiful typefaces, but if I was to show these on screen, it would take quite a long time. It was important to have developed this style in the 18th century, at the dawn of fine printing, as Twyman calls it. The preferred taste of those who were buying printed works was that of a modern typeface. Bodoni's fine typeface has the characteristic of being royal due to his environment. I'll talk about this a little later. All the characteristics that Bodoni had given to his typeface were in themselves a contribution. A change from both old style and transitional, the modern style was better adapted to printing in comparison to the previous styles, which were more adapted to writing. On screen you can see some of the typefaces that I'm talking about. The old style and there's Garamond and transitional Baskerville. The reason the transitional is called transitional is because it was between the time of old and modern. At the time it wouldn't have been referred to as transitional. Bodoni's typefaces today have become associated with fashion. Often brands of high quality and are expensive attach themselves with this typeface. I say, as the typeface represents elegance and finesse. On screen once again, so you can see Armani and Calvin Klein. So, what influenced Bodoni, or how did he achieve this with the environment he was in? The 18th century that Bodoni was surrounded by is recognised as the golden age for printers. Spitting of Italy empowered this for Bodoni. The numerous different families and royalties that were spread between Spain, France and Austria and Italy provided an opportunity for the royal presses to be established. People wanted to make their marks, and one of the best ways to do so was through printing. Not only was this causing Bodoni and other printers to adapt their typefaces and printing methods, but the transition to modern style came between the Baroque and Rococo artistic periods. Briefly, I'll just explain how these influenced typography at the time. The Baroque style in architecture, as well as typography, aims to create a sense of royalty and class. In the Baroque era was mostly where the development of transitional styles of the typeface were developed, meaning the transition of more old to modern. With this, more vertical stress with the contrast between thick and thins occurred, as well as the little or no bracketed serifs. As we know, Fournier was an influence to Bodoni, and he was designing his typefaces much in the style of Rococo. Rococo's lighter styles of ornamentation and natural shapes can have influenced Bodoni to his technical refinement in his designing of his typefaces. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this.